one of the key barriers to this tech has been about safety and safety of the implant itself, the device, because ultimately, in order to create this connection, requires some type of interface to directly contact the brain, and that the existing solutions did not, adequately respect or optimize the safety of the interface, and that was slowing down progress. But also, as a surgeon, the safety of the procedure. So we needed non-damaging and minimally invasive interfaces with the brain, and that's exactly what Precision has been working on.
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
Brain-computer interfaces allow people with neurological diseases to control external devices, such as a robotic arm, using their minds alone. While the technology has existed for over 20 years, it has only recently moved into mainstream medical practice. A company called Precision Neuroscience is pioneering this transition. Precision President and Chief Product Officer Craig Mermel understands that commercializing the technology means first making it safe, minimally invasive, and adaptable to fit the varying needs of neurological patients. From engineering the first ever Apple Watch to conduct digital pathology research at Google, Craig has always favored the intersection of technology and healthcare. He's with us today to discuss his journey into health tech and the life-changing medical devices he's since created. Here's our conversation. Hi, Craig. Welcome. And thanks for joining me this morning.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
It's not raining quite yet, but we're supposed to get a bunch of rain. So we'll be in here for the indoor for a week, I guess.
Yeah.
I thought it would be great for us to, for our listeners to hear a little bit about your background. You have quite a journey where you start your career. You did medical school, but then you also work in Apple. But tell us about how you get to where you are today.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to start there. So, I've always been somebody who loves math and biology and wanted to find ways to take those two interests and have real impact in the world. So I'm a physician scientist by training. I went to the Harvard MIT, Health Sciences and Technology program, which is a fantastic place to go to medical school and meet a lot of people who are both like-minded physicians, but also engineers and business students and people thinking about technology. So I took medical school classes with folks who were doing bioengineering degrees and Sloan MBA, and so that was just part of the ecosystem that helped shape my view that there were so many other ways than just being a doctor to have an impact. When I was in grad school, this was in the mid 2000s, and the thing I was looking for a way to combine my interest in data and healthcare. And the genome had just been sequenced, and we were at the beginning of this amazing period where genomic technology just went on a hyper Moore's law type explosion. And I went to grad school during that period. So I found myself, I did my thesis work at the Broad Institute and worked on the cancer genome, where we were applying, computational tools to take the massive amounts of genomic data that we were generating and try to use that to discover new cancer genes or new insights into the causes of disease. And it really went from being a scientific question to one that was like translationally practically relevant within a very short period of time, right? It was very clear that the way we were going to diagnose and treat cancer, changed in a matter of years. So when I finished my graduate school and I had to go back and finish clinical training, I was thinking about how to combine these interests. And I asked myself, where is that going to happen in the hospital? And the answer was in the pathology lab. So I did clinical training in pathology at MGH with an idea of trying to work on, clinical, having a foot in the clinic, but also having a strong interest in bringing new technology to bear. And I had a great time and was very productive, but I continued to keep thinking about what were the next waves of things that were happening. And this is where part of the story that got me to my current role began, which is my good friend from medical school, Ben Rappaport, and I had an interest in wearable technology. And so at the end of medical school and into residency, we started a small company that was thinking about future applications of pervasive wearable tech. We said, this is just like genomics. We were going to be digitizing aspects of our biology and behavior that were previously unavailable. And that was going to lead us to amazing insights into people's health and disease. And so we did that work, and it was sort of a nights and weekends project. By 2013, 14, we had some tech we thought was pretty cool, and we wanted to license that to a med device or a device manufacturer, not a med device, but a company making us a wearable technology. And we were fortunate enough that the company that ultimately was interested in this tech was Apple. And so in 2014, I moved from a very comfortable and safe and friendly job in academic medicine, moved from the East Coast to the Bay Area, and found myself working as sort of an embedded scientist on the Apple Watch engineering team. And we got to work on, the first generation of a watch, and watch as Apple itself got more and more interested in applications, not just wellness applications or fitness applications, but health applications. So I was at Apple from 2014 to 2018. Had a great time and learned a ton, and then started thinking about, I need to find a way back to my clinical roots as a pathologist. So at that time, Google Research was starting to spin up projects working on artificial intelligence applied to medical imaging data, which of course there was massive amounts of imaging data in fields like radiology and ophthalmology and dermatology. But one of the areas that was emerging was digital pathology and the ability to scan tissue slides. So they recruited me to help lead one of their research teams working on applying latest advances in AI to pathology. And I spent 4 years at Google, learned a whole new set of things about working at the intersection of AI and healthcare data. And, most recently, my current role, I'm president and chief product officer of Precision Neuroscience. We can talk more about that. But really the promise was twofold. One, an opportunity to rejoin a good friend that we had previously, Ben Rappaport, who's the founder and sort of visionary behind the work we're doing. Ben is a neurosurgeon and an electrical engineer, and has been working in the brain-computer interface space other than our brief foray to Apple for his entire career. He had founded a company, and we kind of talked about this as being yet another pattern of, it starts with hardware advances where we get new types of data out of biologic systems, and that over time that turns into problems at the intersection of data science, machine learning, and healthcare. I thought this was going to be a 5 or 7. When Ben first told me about this, I thought this was going to be a 5 or 7 year journey before you had a device in somebody's brain that would be collecting data. As we can talk about, it turns out we're moving quite a bit faster than that. So after spending a year sort of on the sidelines watching the progress that Ben and his team were making, I said, hey, I think this is the perfect opportunity to jump in and start working on a really important next wave of technology. And so I joined Precision on a full-time capacity just over a year ago, at the beginning of 2022.
I don't very often have a guest who were in Apple. And so I know they're very cautious about what you can say and what you cannot say. Maybe this is my opportunity to ask you the question. So you were saying that you and Ben Rappaport started technology, and then Apple acquired that technology. Can you tell me more about that?
So we were working on, our initial application was working on ways of taking data from the Apple Watch and trying to assess measures of functional capacity or physical fitness from these devices. So that was what our startup was doing. And the reason Apple acquired us was because they had a very similar interest in building fitness features for the Apple Watch. So we were, more so than a tech. We were acquired. It was a great outcome, and with that, we joined. It's not fair to say that the technology we had versus what was embedded in the watch obviously went through quite a bit of evolution. And I'd say the most important thing was that, one, we got to be in an environment where, when we were a startup, our dream was to maybe get a few thousand people using our technology. And at Apple, you get to work on technology that has a very good shot of being used by millions of people. that forces a level of rigor and product excellence that I think, is amazing. And it's why they make products that we love, is because it really shows in the effort and the amount of resources Apple pours into building the product. So for me, it was a great, I think of life in terms of when you're on medical school, you think about internships and residencies. This was a residency and what it takes to build a great product. And, I'm proud to have been part of teams that worked on some of these features and got to see them released. And then, of course, Apple went from a very small team in health when I joined, or people who were sort of thinking about potential applications, to now there are regulated software applications that sit on top of a consumer grade wearable device, and clinical studies that are being launched and enrolled, on top of consumer platforms. And I think, I won't take credit for any of that. That was a huge team effort that and many people contributed to that. But it was just such a formative time to learn about the potential of this technology. And I'm incredibly grateful and lucky that I was given that opportunity to join and work on the work that I did.
Yeah. And so I think, Apple has that brand reputation that everything they do seems really excellent. And is there anything that from the experience that you worked with the team of Apple that you did not know? I mean, it opened your eyes coming in when you joined Apple, and then that you carry now.
Oh, I mean, so many things. I mean, I would say the first secret, this is not even a secret, Apple says it, but it's easy to say and really hard to do, which is that the reason Apple makes great products is that it genuinely cares about its products, and it doesn't launch things that it's not satisfied with. And you see that it's kind of, it's hard to do in a startup environment, especially, or any resource constrained environment. Part of the reason Apple can do that, but it goes to the level of care and detail and obsession that you have over getting every part of it right. I think that's part of Apple's mystique, but actually having been there and seen how it plays out in reality gives you a strong sense of, work on products. And if you're going to work on something, one, pick important problems. And then two, if you're going to pick a problem, try to do it the best that you can within whatever resources are available to you. And I think, practically we grew up as scientists and sort of working on new and innovative tech. But the difference between a solution that works in the lab and one that works in the real world, when you're at Apple scale and you're talking about millions of people, the edge cases are going to show up, and they're going to show up many times, right? So if you say, oh, that's 1 in a million, it's like, well, in the first year, you're going to have dozens and maybe hundreds of people who encounter that edge case. So you actually have to think about that. So I think it's a discipline more than anything that I took from Apple, of like what it really takes to build excellent products and to then see them through, and how much effort goes into, when you're in school or you're in the lab, you think a 95% solution is pretty close. Those last 5% takes a lot to do. Yeah. And so that's something that I learned and carry with me quite a bit. And we can talk about this as part of the story. I also carried with other parts in that I met amazing people. You get to see how many different, we were chatting about this before, how many different talents it takes to have an impact, from engineering and healthcare and business development and legal and privacy and ethics and, and payment and all these things that have to come together. And at Apple, we got to put together a lot of those components and meet people. And some of those people, including some of the great engineering talent we worked with, I've been fortunate enough to recruit to join on the current journey. And that's just one of the great joys of getting to be an entrepreneur, is getting to rework with people that you've worked with in the past on a new and important problem.
Yeah, that's the advantage, I think, of being an entrepreneur.
This podcast is sponsored by Brown Rudnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that help life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownrudnick.com. This podcast is also sponsored by Canon Quality Group. Canon Quality Group has been helping medtech startups set up quality management systems for over 10 years. If you're unsure when to get started with quality management in your startup, turn to the experts at canonqualitygroup.com.
One last question on what your comment about the discipline of getting to that, make sure that 5% is really good. Is there like a framework that they use to train you? Because you came from different area, then maybe you did not have that.
No.
And then how do they train you? Or is it somebody just like whip you up, like, this is not good enough?
I think that it wasn't like there was a class, right? You learn there by doing and by being part of it. And the benefit is that there's people who I got to work with had done this, maybe not in exactly the domain, fitness or healthcare, but they had done it for some of the biggest consumer products in the world. And so they had a way of working and most importantly, expectations that carried forward. So it wasn't enough to say, yeah, this is only going to happen some percentage of the time, so you can forget about it. They say, no, like let's go there, and then it shows up in the fact that the company takes that seriously and invests in trying to make the products great. And I think that's just shows in how much people love technology, and it starts with the fact that Apple employees love their own technology and use it, and that's the feedback. So I think it was something you kind of learn, or I learned sort of not directly from somebody didn't teach me, but you just learn it by looking at how these things are. And I will say that some things I learned, I didn't really know I learned until I left. And
that's how it works usually.
And yeah, you tend to understand a place even more once you're no longer there, and you can kind of see that certain things you take for granted. I had jobs, of course, in medical school and graduate school and residency, but this was my first time in a real corporate environment. And so I'd say that I didn't fully know what I had learned until after I left. And there's still things every day I think about in our current role to see like, well, how would Apple do it? That being said, at a startup, you don't have the resources. So, it is very common in startup world to launch and iterate, and you can't always, but I think even knowing where you're trying to go is important in enforcing a discipline, because we want to, if you are successful, then you owe it to yourself and the product and the industry and the problem you're going after to try to make it as good as it possibly can be.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about the joint precision, because you had the opportunity to work with your old friends, Ben Report, but I'm sure it's not just the friendship, but I think there's other things. Maybe you can tell us more about what precision neuroscience is doing.
Absolutely. So obviously my relationship with Ben was a very influential part, but really what attracted me and why I joined was the mission of the company. So Precision Neuroscience is one of now several companies that's trying to commercialize brain-computer interface technology and make it available to, millions of people who are suffering from pretty devastating neurologic diseases and injury. Just a personal anecdote, as a medical student, you go through all the different domains, and some of the most moving and tragic cases I saw were on the neurology clinics, where we would see a patient with a devastating stroke or neurodegenerative disease. And we had all these amazing technical tools to diagnose and figure out what was the problem. And in most cases, the answer was, well, we really don't have anything to offer. And that's despite amazing progress we've made in fundamental neuroscience, the translation to therapies that actually help people has been like really frustratingly slow. So, understanding that there's a huge human need, and then looking specifically at the, sort of capabilities, the readiness of all the different components it's going to take, and the team that, not just Ben, but the team he had assembled, were all the things that made me really excited to join Precision Neuroscience.
So could you tell us more about what is the technology?
Yeah.
How does it work?
So I'm sure, a brain-computer interface, start there and then tell you about how Precision is approaching the problem. So the idea of a brain-computer interface is, simple to say and hard to do. It's basically trying to create a direct communication between the brain's electrical activity and, the digital world, whether that's a computer, a mobile device, or, potentially a robotic prosthetic device like a wheelchair or a robotic limb. Why would you why would you potentially want to create such a connection? There's many potential uses, but if you think about a lot of the neurologic diseases that I mentioned, things like stroke, spinal cord injury, certain neurodegenerative conditions, they have various causes, but the fundamental issue is that the activity of the brain's ability to think gets disconnected from, the body's ability to take information in or out. And the idea of a brain-computer interface is to try to create, to restore function by sort of jumping over, so to speak, wherever that defect is. So if you can, somebody who's had, a spinal cord injury, their brain still works in terms of thinking and intending to move, but the body can no longer respond. But if you can allow the brain to directly control a robotic arm, a prosthetic device, or computer, you can give that person back a significant amount of function, mobility, independence, and, thereby improve their quality of life significantly. So that's the overall goal of brain-computer interfaces. Before jumping into precision, just to say, the idea was coined. This is not like a new term. Like, the concept was coined in the 1970s, and pioneering work was done in the 90s. The first human to have a brain-computer interface was actually done in the early 2000s. So this is like not science fiction. It's actually been around for, close to 20 years at this point. And there have been over like three or four dozen patients in that time period who've had one of these devices implanted. The problem is really one of technology translation, of taking something that works in the lab in small clinical studies at like one-off, studies at institutions, and building all of the components end to end that are needed to make this into a system that people can use in their everyday lives, and to then take it through the FDA regulatory process, the reimbursement process, and make a sustainable business on it. So the fact that, this sounds like science fiction, but actually the more I learned about the space, you realize this is a lot of the key scientific points have been proven, but it's really about how do you get this technology from the few dozen patients who've had it today to the millions of patients who suffer from neurologic disease and could benefit from this technology.
So what challenges that you guys overcome that bring something that was only allowed in the lab for like 1 to a dozen people who can benefit from this to something that, what innovation that you do differently?
There are several things and, several innovations that are needed. What I'll tell you about is, why is Precision founded? We're not the only brain-computer interface technology. It starts with Ben and his visions. As I mentioned, Ben was one of my classmates. He's a neurosurgeon, and he did his PhD in electrical engineering. And actually, when I met him, when we were just starting school together, I said, "What are you going to do?" And he said, "I'm going to work on brain-computer interface technologies." And that was the first time I had ever heard of. I said, "What's a brain-computer interface?" So, this is for Ben a long journey, and something he's really spent his whole life working on. Ben, after our work at Apple, actually was one of the first members joined to Neuralink, which was Elon Musk's venture, started in the space a few years ago. He spent a few really informative years working there, and similarly learned a lot, met a lot of really important people, some of whom have now come to work with us at Precision. But, fundamentally why Ben was excited and thought it was important to start Precision Neuroscience was a belief in that one of the key barriers to this tech has been about safety, and safety of the implant itself, the device, because ultimately in order to create this connection requires some type of interface to directly contact the brain, and that the existing solutions did not adequately respect or optimize the safety of the interface, and that was slowing down progress. But also as a surgeon, the safety of the procedure. So we needed non-damaging and minimally invasive interfaces with the brain. And that's exactly what Precision has been working on. Company was founded in 2021 with this. We raised our Series A financing in April. And in those time, we've developed a novel interface that we call the Layer 7 cortical interface. This is think of it as a very thin film, thinner than Scotch tape, but you can kind of think about it as a thin and flexible substrate on which we can fabricate thousands of tiny little electrodes. And these electrodes are much, much smaller than the standard electrodes that are often used in surgeries for mapping the brain. They're on the order of 50 microns each, and they're printed at a very tight spacing. So what it offers you, and this device sits on the surface of the brain, where it does no damage to the brain, it can actually be reversed without causing any damage. And that's a really important feature to us in terms of safety and characteristics. But it allows you still, it's in contact with brain tissue in a non-damaging way, and it records at a very high resolution and high bandwidth the electrical information of the brain that we can then process out and using software and machine learning turn into control signals that can help restore communication with the outside world. In addition to that, Ben also, and this was Precision Innovation, developed a minimally invasive surgical approach to place the array, even though you do need to, it is inside the skull and on the brain, so you do need to cut through bone, but we do that in a very minimally invasive way. We call it a microslit insertion. We make a very thin, less than a millimeter thick incision in the skin and the bone, and then using special guidance and tools, we're able to slide the array into that slit onto the brain surface, so that at the end of the day, we're not removing a big chunk of skull and doing a lot of morbidity in the surgery, and that's part of our system, design to make sure that these implants can be developed and delivered in a way that's safe and effective, because we want this technology to serve the largest number of patients possible.
So how far along are you in terms of putting this in clinical study in human? And also, it seems so simple when I think about it. There's the piece that there must be some sort of battery or power that emits something there. And then also there's a skull, which is pretty not very poor. I'm not saying it's porous, but you have to make sure that the sensor or the electron just can pass through that. There's a lot of, and then the substrate has to withstand being inside the body. All these little things that you need to think about, right?
Yeah. So every little thing that you described there are problems, and they're all hard problems in and of themselves. But in terms of, you asked where our progress is. So as I mentioned, so far we are a preclinical company. We have not done human implants, and we're still, we still have work to do to get to the final vision I told you about. One of the things we're really excited. So we've done a lot of work in validating the safety and the function of the system in animal models. So showing that the system can be safely implanted. It doesn't damage the brain. It records very high fidelity signals, and that this system, can perform functions of a brain-computer interface in animal models. We've published, for your listeners who are very familiar with this, we published a preprint early last year, and we have a paper that is describing the system and its validation, going through the peer review process. So we've done a lot of the preclinical work. What's unique about our approach, and it goes back to what I mentioned, that our interface is non-damaging and reversible, means we can actually think about developing this for clinical applications in a staged manner. So to go back to the big vision, in order to help somebody with paralysis, which is a chronic injury, they want a device that they can get implanted and use for months and many years and hopefully decades, because their injury is not going away. But and the regulatory process for a permanent implant is a class 3 rigorous device and takes many years to get all the way through that process. But because our device can be placed on the brain and reversed, we can think about getting clearance for a temporary short-term implant, which we are also excited about, has the potential to do clinical benefit in the immediate instance, because what we're really doing is offering a high-resolution picture of the brain's activity. So a lot of our focus as a company, we are already making the shift from sort of a preclinical to clinical stage company. We are planning to submit our first FDA application for a temporary implantation this calendar year. And we also have, clinical partner sites lined up that would, sometime this year also be doing our first human implantations. Again, there will be a stepwise process. We first have to repeat the safety and functional data. And it's going to take us several more years to develop the other parts of the system, the implantable electronics that will power the system and communicate, as well as the software. And that all has a separate regulatory process. So we're launching a brain-computer interface technology next year, but we're moving very quickly through the stages, and we think that has a lot of really important benefits to us as a company, but most importantly, allows us to start helping patients now. And that's why all of us at Precision are working, is we're trying to do this work for clinical benefit. And we think the opportunity to do that in the near term is really exciting and important step for us.
Well, I'm glad you're working on something that's really challenging and difficult. So interesting you mentioned in 2017 we have our symposium. We invited Robert Gaunt. I don't know if you know of him. And so he was talking about, I'm all about robotic. I think that's really cool. So he's showing about the patients that he implanted, and it's like the machinery that has to come with the patients. That's almost, it's not practical, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's good to see that things are moving along that can benefit more patients. So one last question, and I know this compared to your other company, this one, it seems like going to be like a longer journey. Mm-hmm. And having a secure funding is also helpful. Mm-hmm. So, but I'm sure there's a lot of ups and downs along the way. How do you keep the momentum going, keep the group, the teams to keep on moving, even though sometimes the end line seems far away?
Yeah. I mean, I think definitely being at a startup, you're in a different capital environment than being potentially at a large company. But in many ways, the problem is the same, which is even at a big company, you have to convince somebody to fund your work and to keep going, despite all the inevitable setbacks and difficulties that you encounter along the way. We've been first thing to say is we have a great team, and I think, one of our strengths has been being mission focused. And if you remember the mission, the problems just become, things to be solved, but none of them are, existential issues that, you remember the reason why you're struggling in the first place. So I think remembering the mission has been really important, but we do need a lot of, we need capital. These processes, all the testing and development that's necessary to bring a technology to market is expensive. We've been incredibly fortunate to attract and recruit, really supportive investors. We just closed our Series B financing in January. This was definitely not an easy time to be raising money. The capital environment, has been definitely more difficult than it was in years past. But, importantly, I think the investors that we have been able to recruit have the same vision that, first of all, this is like a really important problem. Nothing about the short-term economic situation changes the huge human need. And in some ways, the fact that, we're not yet at market means that hopefully things will be on the next business cycle by the time we come to market. So that luck plays an important role in this for sure. But we have the capital, and we raised $41 million, which is objectively a lot of money, but for a medical device, is so really the important thing for us is to be good stewards of that money and use that money to make sure that we hit the goals we need to stay on track. Mm-hmm. And I would just say that, one of the easiest things and easiest ways, and this is again, maybe something that you learn at Apple. Apple, for all the resources, is famous for saying, Steve Jobs said he was prouder of the things he said no to, because saying no to one thing is what allows you to put your effort into the things that are ultimately most important and allows you to do your best work. For us, it's about staying incredibly focused on what are the core problems that we need to solve in this round, in order to continue to add value, get closer to the goal, and be in a position to be able to support the journey and the mission that we set ourselves on. So, it's important that you, no matter how much money you have, that you're always laser focused on what are the key value generating steps that you can use with that money, and setting up your team and everyone around you to execute as well as you possibly can against those goals.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate your sharing your insight, and good luck.
Thank you. It was great to be here, and I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We want to thank our executive producer, Herminio Neto, and our podcast engineer, Andrew Rojek. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. The Health Technology Podcast is available on all major platforms.